Well, we'll take it up from there to our first conversation. Now, in recent news, the ex-depot price of petrol from Dangote Refinery there's been this flip-flop around that price. The landing cost of imported petrol, that's Aerobob gasoline, was 870 naira at the time. But this means Dangote's price was lower than the cost of importing and distributing gasoline. The landing cost of premium auto spirits are now averaged between 850, 870, 835, depending on where it's coming from. That's reports from Major Energies Marketers Association of Nigeria have shown this report. Now, this is even as prices offered by Dangote Petroleum refineries threaten the margins of fuel importers and marketers alike. According to Meman, the landing cost of petrol at 872 per litre, that's about 2 weeks ago on April 28, and 868 as at April 29, and on April 23rd, the landing cost was averaged about 859 naira per litre, indicating that the cost of importing petrol has now risen above our local refining announced ex-depot price of 835 naira per litre. With the landing cost rising, importers of petroleum products seem to have been challenges selling their products at profitable rates. Now, this indicates that the Dangote refinery price was lower than the cost of importing and distributing petroleum products, potentially affecting the pricing of other fuel stations. Well, let's look at this price mechanism and the logistics around pricing. My guest is Mr. Jide Pratt. He is the COO, owner, and country manager, Trade Grid. It's good to have you on the show. Good afternoon, Mr. Pratt. It's good to see you today.
Thank you, Tolu. Thanks for talking to me. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much. It's interesting to also have you join us virtually today. Well, let's start our conversation with what you make of this pricing. There's been this back and forth around it. You're a major player in this industry. Many would allude to the fact that, well, it depends on the price of crude. It depends on where you're importing from. What is your own clear understanding of what is playing out in this market at this time?
Thanks again, Tolu. So let's start from the basics and the fundamentals. Every time you cook a pot of soup, you need ingredients to make that soup. If the price of pepper goes up, the price of tomatoes and onions goes up, the price of your pot of soup is going to go up. So let's move to petroleum pricing. There are two things that are very, very critical. Every time we get petroleum products, we're getting it out of crude oil. So it means that we're going to crack crude and then get what you call derivatives. They're derived from crude oil. So it goes to say that, like a lot of people will always tell you, if the price of crude oil goes up, the direct correlation of that is that you have what you call a petrol or gasoline index. And for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to use something called Eurobob Oxy. Now, that is a quote for petroleum products specific to gasoline or PMS. So if it goes up automatically, it means that that whole mix, in terms of the cost of the derivative, the cost of logistics, and then foreign exchange, if they all go north, the prices will go north. If, on the other hand, they go south, then everything in that dynamics means that the landed cost or the price you buy at the pumps reduces. So those are the basic fundamentals of how it works. When you have a nation that has a combination of imported and locally refined petroleum products, they will still technically follow the tenets of how you get to pricing. However, there might be advantages on one end that are not on the other end. So I think that might be a good opening in terms of how we get to the prices and where we are.
So back to how, because as of today, I also saw in the news that 6 petrol depots slashed prices as competition heightened in the downstream. Are we going to continue to see developments like this across the board in the market?
So, Tolu, yes. The straight answer to that is yes. So think about it that any and every time we buy diesel, and let's not forget, diesel has been deregulated for upwards of 15 to 20 years. We see prices go up and we see prices go down. We don't seem to have a problem with that. We've accepted it as the norm. So it means that if Mr. John Miss Jane bring in petroleum products at the same time. If Mr. John has an advantage in terms of freight, for instance, Mr. John can decide to pass on that freight advantage to the end user. If Miss Jane sees an advantage somewhere else in terms of freight, or maybe her cost of funding, or maybe her foreign exchange, she can also decide to pass that on to the end market or the consumer. Now, why would they do this? They will protect their margins, number one, and then use it as an entry strategy to win more customers. So yes, Tolu, going forward, we'll see much more of this. One thing that seems to help a bit is that we've seen some constants around the exchange rate. It's not yet uhuru, but I mean, that constant had given some people a lot of possibilities to plan and land their products at an appropriate price. That's what we'll keep on seeing.
Moving on, we've talked about the price of crude and how this affects it. Now, local refining, many say that's also a shift that for a capacity of 650,000 barrels, which Dangote has, analysts like you have also argued that one way or the other, Nigeria has now become a major player in the refining market. Now, if that is true, because I know that before now, the likes of Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and all those other countries were where they used to import refined products from. Are we competing? Are we really competing in the refining market at the moment with our capacity?
I won't use the word competing. I think we have blown the refining market out of the water. And let's be extremely clear about one thing. If the nameplate of a refinery is 650,000 barrels a day, what it means is that it's a super refinery. The Dangote refinery is a super refinery and came to close the existing gaps that existed in refining. Let's be extremely clear. Prior to that, we had what I would call ad hoc refineries because they had aged, and while they had aged, their efficiencies had dropped. A lot of refineries in Europe, some in Scotland around Aberdeen, and not a lot in the US because there are also a lot of super refineries. But the shift now means that because Nigeria has a super refinery, she's able to meet first and foremost most of Nigeria's requirements, and also so most of West Africa and also sub-Saharan Africa. So that's a major shift. So it's no longer a competition. There's no refinery as big as the Dangote refinery in Africa. One issue might be the fact that it's a single train refinery. So what that means is that when you need to do a turnaround maintenance, it is just basically, more often than not, it's just the crude distillation unit that will stay active. If that happens, then it means production capacity is dropped to as much or as little as 45,000 barrels a day. 45%, sorry, a day in terms of output. So I don't think we're competing anymore. We've blown them out. And you now find out that a lot of WTI is coming from the US back into Nigeria.
Yeah.
If that is happening, it means that the refineries they would have fed around North Africa probably have looked at it that there's a dynamic shift. So if we can get more money in terms of selling our crude, and it's the closest crude to what we have in Nigeria in terms of sulfur content and in terms of sweetness, and it's also at a discount. So that's where we are.
The richest man, that's the owner of Dangote Refinery, also said at a forum recently that Nigerian petrol price is 55% below the West African average price. How does that also come to you?
So the first thing is this: when you move petroleum products from point A to point B, two things are critical: the size of the vessels and then the drafts. So it means that, and let me put it this way so that we all understand for the purpose of this conversation. If I take an Uber from my house to the office, and I'm the only one, then it means that technically I pay the fees. If I do a ride-share app where we're four, then it means that we have split the cost. So that said, you get freight efficiencies from larger vessels and larger drafts. Nigeria has two main jetties. So if you go to somewhere called the Pinnacle, they have what you call a single point mooring system. It's an ASPM. Let's just say it's a floating jetty. Because of that floating jetty being somewhere way off water, what it means is that they're able to bring in larger vessels into large storage tanks. So they're driving some efficiencies. If you went around the coast in terms of West Africa, the next best place might be Togo. But while Togo has some good draft restriction advantages, sadly, they don't have the storage that Nigeria has. So you find out Nigeria is at a prime position because of two things. We've got the drafts, we've got ASPMs, and then third and final factor, we have tankage storage. I think one thing that needs to shift from Africa, and that's what I believe ADA is trying to do, is harmonize the quality. Because the smaller your jetty is, it means that you're going to double handle. You're going to have to go in with smaller vessels. You're going to have to double of load. So I mean, you load into this tank, it's full, you have to truck out. Once you do that, you're lengthening the time and the operation. So we have an advantage from freight, we have an advantage from draft restrictions, and we have an advantage from tankage capacities.
Brilliant stuff, as always. But let me ask you, because I know that this petroleum products, refining, movement, distribution is about margins, you know, and that's where the money comes from. Volumes, margins, and all. I've seen marketers, or my recent discussions with marketers, both Merman, both depot owners, they've been talking so much about that limitation in the issue of margins. How do we run this business? Many of them are on loans and all of this. Since the implementation of the PIA, it's like their margins are getting smaller and smaller by the day. I'd like you to talk to us around that. Did you get my question, Mr. Pratt?
No, you froze up for a bit from my end, so I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
All right, I was talking about margins now, the marketers' margins. You know, even the independent marketers depend on margins. Major marketers depend on margins. But with this disparity in price and all of that, what do you think is happening to margins around the distribution of petroleum products?
So I mean, downstream is extremely margin sensitive, and it's a volume-driven game. The margins are really small. So what you find out a lot of marketers are doing, and it's one of two things. Let's look at it from the refinery. The refinery tries to do what you call a dynamic pricing. So that way, it means that any and every time the refinery sees prices go up, they adjust up. And every time they see prices go down, they adjust down. So they're taking their margins based on what they refine. And I'll use the word ex-refinery cost. One advantage the refinery has to be able to do that and keep their margins sustainable is that they're a brand new refinery. So when you look at issues of depreciation, amortization, they're not as hard hit. Efficiencies with the Nelson index they have, they're doing pretty well. So they'll take those advantages up the top. Now let's go to other players in that space. They would buy at a price and then decide that, look, can I do a weighted average cost of capital? So if I make 2 naira on this transaction, 1 naira on this one, 7 on this, do I draw a straight line and keep on selling at every price I buy plus margin so that I have an average weighted basket? They would also have to introduce services into their forecourts. So you have things like TBA, which we call tire, batteries, and accessories. You also have people who come into and they believe they have loyalty cards. So some companies had a card for each vendor, for instance, where you come into the station and you accumulate points. So oil changes. Will they sell gas? Will they sell lubricants? Will they sell any and everything that has a higher margin to be able to keep that forecourt active, to be able to tap into these margins that are, for want of a better word, undulating. So I think those are the two prime ways you find out that marketers are trying to adjust.
Network issues there. Okay, I think we have Mr. Pratt back.
Did you miss me? Or
yes. Like towards the end of your submission, maybe you could take that again.
Okay, so towards the end, what I was saying is that on the margin side,
yes, please.
And I talked about weighted average cost of capital.
Yes,
I've
please.
talked about some dynamic pricing, but it's also important to say that every time this happens, we're also able to offer more services. Do we sell gas to the customers? Do we sell lubricants? Do we have tire, batteries, and accessories, which we call non-fuel revenue? So that in all that mix, Tolu, we're able to make money in different pockets. and stay active, because if we're not active, then it's more people to the job market. I hope you got that clearly.
Clearly, very clearly. Now, the downstream again, well, almost finally, the competition expected considering the implementation of the PIA. In your understanding as a major player again in this segment of Nigeria's economy, are you seeing the expected, well, you said we might not use the word competition, but are you seeing that is this what is expected with the proper implementation of that document? Because we've gotten to a point where some say part of that document has been implemented, but a part of it is not fully implemented. That's talking about the Petroleum Industry Act, which we waited for years before that was passed into law. If we continue this way, what is the outlook of this ongoing back and forth with pricing in the market?
So brilliant question, Tolu. So let's start with the PIA. It took us so long to get there, but we have an act. Once you move from a bill to an act, what we now need to do is keep on iterating on that act. We haven't implemented what the PIA says to the letter, and it will take us time to get there. But it also means from the legislation and from the industry point of view, we must begin to tweak the dynamics that we see in real life are not working. If you give me, let's pick a typical example. The refinery on one hand believes that because we have the capacity to meet Nigeria's need, there is no need for an import permit. Now, the PIA is very clear about if or not there shouldn't be. But you see, the PIA tries to foster competition. So ideally, what it should be is a balance, saying that if we're hitting 60% here, 40% here, because what it does is that enables the competition that the PIA tries to achieve. Now, where are we in terms of price discoveries? Still not where we need to be, where we have templates that show us this is what our next refinery price is around today. This is what a landing cost is around today. A bit more will still need to be done in terms of passing information from the regulator standpoint. However, we have an act. It's not yet Uhuru, and I believe competition is not yet, and I'll use the word, the chains have not been let off in terms of competition. We must have some form of guiding formulas that let us know that importation is coming in at X percentage this month. Local refinery is Y percentage this month, because the aim is that the refineries will serve Nigeria and also serve Africa. That's number one. So ideally, it should be a gantry play as well as what you call it, a coastal play from the refinery. For imports, we need to be very, very clear. And back to the PIA, we know the quality and quantity that is allowed when it's allowed. These things need to be published. If a company brings in more than it should, what happens? If a company brings in something lower in specification, what are the penalties? I believe the PIA, again, to end, is something that we needed to have, we have, but we'll continue to iterate and tweak to get to Uhuru.
Well, before I let you go, are you worried about any form of monopoly in the downstream moving forward?
I would say yes, I am. And why would I say so? When we hear conversations around a refinery can take 100%, can meet 100%, and that is the only refinery. The worry for me becomes if it's a single train refinery, what it means is that if anything happens to that single train, we're in a crisis. So what it means is that two things must happen. More licenses have been given for local refineries. Some need to step up. I think the Bois is the closest thing to the Dangote refinery. It's about 200,000 or 225,000 barrels per day capacity. Most of the modular refineries might not be able to step up to the plate in terms of major refineries. So that's on another side. But I also think that in this, imports must still happen. And imports should happen based on a quota to say, is it 60-40? I don't know what it is, but that dynamic and shift must be enabled to continue. So those are my worries, but I think that we're not doing too badly in terms of managing them at the moment, Tolu.
Mr. Jide Pratt is COO, Iona and Country Manager, Trade Grid. Hope to have you in the studio when next we'll have this chat. Interesting conversation as always. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tolu.
Thank
you, Tolu. Thank you very much.
Enjoy your weekend and the break.
You too.
All right then. Well, interesting conversation with Mr. Pratt as always, but we'll take